Good. Hey, we got a call about a male hitting a female and the two of them getting in this vehicle and taking off.
So I don't want to try and defend myself by saying anything here, but I pushed her away. She gets really worked up, and when she does, she swings, and she had her cell phone in her hand. So I was just trying to push her away. But Gabrielle, talking about fiance. What's that?
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it hardly seems possible that both of these young people, who just a few weeks ago were moving around America and smiling, and we just saw them apparently living their lives unfettered, fancy-free, happy. There's like nothing left of both of them. Two beautiful lives gone, lost, eviscerated. And so where do we go from here? Well, probably the most important piece of evidence, certainly in terms of Brian Laundrie, is his notebook. And I think he took that notebook into the park for a reason. He left behind his wallet, he left behind his phone, but he took his notebook. And surely that was to communicate something on his own terms. Now, according to Brian's father, Gabby's fiancé was upset when he left for the park. Chris Laundrie tried to stop him but wasn't able to. This clearly indicates Brian's state of mind when he left, as well as his state of mind for the first few hours at least, when he was alone in the wilderness. Grief is a process. Grief is a process, and Brian was still in the raw opening stages dealing with his grief. What made it all the more difficult was that he couldn't really talk about it, not fully, and once he was ensconced in nature, he couldn't talk to anyone at all. That would be very difficult for anyone, but especially for an emotionally immature and anxious 23-year-old. Earlier this month, I also heard some tragic news and distressing news about a really good close friend. One of the first impulses one has is to reach out and talk to someone, because you feel exposed, you feel vulnerable and undone. You feel overwhelmed by reality. You can't deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it. Talking and sharing is the first step to moving beyond the denial and beginning the long process of healing. A funeral is an important opportunity, a ritual to deal with grief in a collective sense. I wonder whether Brian had any means of communication, whether there was a signal in the reserve, or whether he did away with himself before the funeral on Sunday, September 26th, almost a month ago now. At that stage, Brian would have been on the run for around 2 weeks. If you've ever watched Naked and Afraid, the contestants often really start to struggle after the first week going into the second. It remains to be seen just how long Brian lasted alone in the wild. The notebook, though, may provide answers. Of all the things Brian took with him and left behind, the notebook was one of the least of practical benefit, unless he used it to kindle a fire. Yet psychologically, writing things down would have been of huge benefit. It would have given him perhaps a sense of perspective, a sense of putting things in order, certainly in his heart and in his mind. We know that Chris McCandless spent a lot of his time in the wild reading and scribbling notes. Brian's final post on Instagram, which includes a lengthy memo about how to treat the earth, shows, though introverted, Brian was an expressive and emotional person. So I think it's very likely he did write at some length in his notebook. And that brings us to the next section dealing with the remains. A partial skull was recovered, not the full skull. And this is possibly why there was this reference to partial remains. The fact that only a partial skull was recovered, I think, indicates the size of the scavengers we're talking about. And the fact that the remains were found in an area previously submerged by water, I think takes us directly to alligators. Every year there are about 3 major bites in Florida on average, and alligators are endemic to wetlands. But I think there's another possibility too. A bullet wound to the cranium would have weakened what is usually the strongest, most fortified structure in the body. And then there are other large critters present besides alligators: black bears, panthers, and snakes. And then also smaller critters like bobcats, swallow-tailed kites, and one of the most common scavengers in the US, raccoons. Many people have expressed surprise that a person could become skeletonized so quickly, and I think one way to address these questions is to go to the Laci Peterson case. I've written 3 books about Scott Peterson and studied the whole disposal at sea scenario in detail. And what we see there is Laci and Connor's remains washing ashore on April the 13th and 14th, respectively, both relatively intact, and both cadavers had been in the seawater for 3.5 months, right? 3 times longer than Brian Laundrie. But there's an important difference here. I believe Laci was wrapped in a tarp, which in turn was wrapped in chicken wire and secured with several custom-made concrete anchors. Also, Connor was protected, shielded from scavengers because he was inside Laci's womb. One might ask, why was the state of Gabby's remains so different from Brian's? I personally suspect that she was either partially buried or covered in something, perhaps a tarp or a few rocks. Are there more larger scavengers in Florida, and how many are larger than alligators in Wyoming? I have had some requests to do lives dealing with the recent events. I am thinking of doing one dealing with the psychology of Brian, who's feeling powerless in terms of the opposite sex, in terms of trying to be attractive to his partner. That does seem to be kind of a overarching theme to what is going on. And so I kind of want to address this to the many young men that are out there. You know, what does it take to be a man today in the 21st century? What is a modern man? And you know, I do feel like this is a modern Shakespearean tragedy. It has touched a lot of people, young and old, and in quite a deep way. I think a lot of people have been trying to find a way to freedom and happiness in this time of heightened anxiety, heightened feelings of vulnerability. We've wanted to come alive. And this couple have tried to do that, gone out into the wild, gone out and try to live their lives, only to have reality catch up to them and overwhelm them. So what is one to do? What is an alternative to chasing the fairy tale? How can we avoid the nightmare? And so I'm going to try and touch on that. Not sure exactly when, it might be this weekend or the next weekend. If you've got any ideas what you'd like to talk about, some questions you have, please leave them in the comments. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.